Good morning. This is lesson number 38 in our study in the book of Acts, and it covers the last portion of chapter 25 and all of chapter 26. If you would allow me, I'll read for us starting at verse 23 in chapter 25, and it reads as follows. On the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp, and they entered the audience hall with the military tribunes and the prominent men of the city. Then at the command of Festus, Paul was brought in, and Festus said, King Agrippa, and all who are present with us, you see this man about whom the whole Jewish people petitioned me, both in Jerusalem and here, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. But I found that he had done nothing deserving death. And as he himself appealed to the emperor, I decided to go ahead and send him. But I have nothing definite to write to my Lord about him. Therefore I have brought him before you all, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after we have examined him, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable to send a prisoner and not to indicate the charges against him. So Agrippa said to Paul, you have permission to speak for yourself. Then Paul stretched out his hand and made his defense. I consider myself fortunate that it is before you, King Agrippa, I am going to make my defense today against all the accusations of the Jews, especially because you are familiar with all the customs and controversies of the Jews. Therefore I beg you to listen to me patiently. My manner of life from my youth, spent from the beginning among my own nation and in Jerusalem, is known by all the Jews. They have known for a long time, if they are willing to testify, that according to the strictest party of our religion, I have lived as a Pharisee. And now I stand here on trial because of my hope in the promise made by God to our fathers, to which our 12 tribes hope to attain as they earnestly worship night and day. And for this hope I am accused by Jews, O King. Why is it thought incredible by any of you that God raises the dead? I myself was convinced that I ought to do many things in opposing the name of Jesus in Nazareth, and I did so in Jerusalem. I not only locked up many of the saints in prison after receiving authority to put them from the chief priests, but when they were put to death, I cast my votes against them. And I punished them often in all the synagogues and tried to make them blaspheme. And in raging fury against them, I persecuted them even to foreign cities. In this connection, I journeyed to Damascus with the authority and the commission of the chief priests. At midday, O King, I saw on the way a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, that shone around me and those who journeyed with me. And when we had all fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying to me in the Hebrew language, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. And I said, who are you, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. But rise and stand on your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you as a servant and witness to the things in which you have seen me and to those in which I appeared to you, delivering you from your people and from the Gentiles to whom I am sending you, to open their eyes so that they may see and turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. Therefore, O King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision, but declared first to those in Damascus, then in Jerusalem, and throughout all the region of Judea, and also to the Gentiles, that they should repent and turn to God, performing deeds in keeping with their repentance. For this reason the Jews seized me in the temple, and they tried to kill me. To this day I have had the help that comes from God. And so I stand here testifying both to small and great, saying nothing but what the prophets and Moses said would come to pass. And the Christ must suffer, and that by being the first to rise from the dead. He would proclaim both light to our people and to the Gentiles. And as he was saying these things in his defense, Festus cried with a loud voice, "Paul, you're out of your mind. Your great learning is driving you out of your mind." But Paul said, "I am not out of my mind, most excellent Festus, but I am speaking true and rational words. For the king knows about these things, and I am speaking to him boldly. For I am persuaded that none of these things has escaped his notice. For this has not been done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe." And Agrippa said to Paul, "In such a short time would you persuade me to be a Christian?" And Paul said, "Whether short or long, I would to God that not only you, but also all who hear me this day might become such as I am, except for these chains." Then the king rose, and the governor and Bernice and those who were sitting with them. And when they had withdrawn, they said to one another, "This man is doing nothing to deserve death or imprisonment." And Agrippa said to Festus, "This man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar." We come now to a second time of Paul making his defense against the accusations that the Jews have brought against him. And he is making this defense not just before Felix before, where he stood once, or before Festus, who he has stood yet another time, but now for a third time before Festus and also before King Agrippa. And it's interesting to see what's going on here, because when they come in, Festus says to King Agrippa and to Bernice, "The whole Jewish people petitioned me, both in Jerusalem and here, shouting that he ought to live no longer." Now, I found that an interesting thing, that Festus wants to start out by saying, the whole Jewish people. Really, it wasn't the whole Jewish people. It was just the religious rulers from Jerusalem and some Jews from Asia who were making this claim against Paul. But not all Jews were making this claim against Paul. This is again a little bit of a hyperbolic statement by one of the people regarding Paul. It has a modicum of truth, but not a complete bit of truth. The only truth that we truly have for why they are here today is that Paul appealed to Caesar. And in appealing to Caesar, King Festus had a problem. In verse 20, he says, "Being at a loss how to investigate these questions, I asked whether he wanted to go to Jerusalem, and he said no. He said he wanted to be kept here, and he wanted to go to the emperor. And I wanted to send him." But, verse 26, Festus admits to King Agrippa, "I have nothing definite to write to my lord about him." In other words, I have nothing I can put as charges against Rome that I can send to Caesar to say why this man is being sent to Caesar. And you see, the reason for that was, remember, there are three things that Paul is being accused of. One, he's being accused of stirring up crowds and causing riots throughout all of the world. The second thing was that he defiled the temple. And the third thing was that he was part of a sect. And that is the only thing that could have been brought up as a charge against Paul, against the Romans. Because a sect that's not acknowledged by the Romans is by law a crime. But as we saw before, when Festus went and examined this, he determined that Paul did not belong to a sect that was opposing Rome. And so he has absolutely nothing which he can turn and write to the emperor, to the Caesar, and say, this is why I'm sending this man to you. The only laws he truly has broken, if any, would be the customs and traditions of the Jews. And the Roman courts had nothing to do with those. Now, King Agrippa and Bernice, who have come in, are Jewish. King Agrippa, as we talked about last week, is the third in the line of Herods. Herod the Great was his grandfather, who had had the children put to death in Jerusalem and in Bethlehem after the birth of Christ. And then Herod the First was his son, who is the brother the father of King Agrippa II. This Agrippa, who is married to Bernice. And if you recall, last week I told you about the fact that King Agrippa himself was raised as a Pharisee. He is versed in the law of the Jews and in their customs. And right now he stands in accusation by the Jews of having broke the rules. Because one, he divorced 2 other wives. And he married Bernice as his third wife, but she is also his sister. So there's an incestuous relationship here. And Bernice had to divorce her husband to be able to marry King Agrippa. And so they stand in judgment by the Jews for the way they're living their life. But they are the power that Rome has put in place for the Jews to say that they have a king. They are just kind of the puppet of the Roman government. But King Agrippa does understand all about the Jews, and he does understand all about the issues that the Jews would have. And so Paul, after hearing that King Agrippa is there and that he's there to hear about him, when King Agrippa, in verse 1 of chapter 26, you have permission to speak for yourself, states that, Paul then says, verse 2, I consider myself fortunate that it is before you, King Agrippa, I am going to make my defense today against all the accusations of the Jews, especially because you are familiar with all the customs and controversies of the Jews. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently. So Paul lays it out. He truly is grateful to make his defense before King Agrippa, because Agrippa understands everything about the Jews, and being a trained Pharisee himself, understands completely all that Paul would have stood for. Now, there's some interesting things that are going to go on here. Paul is going to go through and give a history of his life. He starts in verse 4 stating, my manner of life from my youth, spent from the beginning among my own nation and in Jerusalem, is known by all the Jews. I love the comment that Paul says, my life is known by all the Jews, because that's the phrase that Festus used to say that Paul is being charged by all the Jews, when he really wasn't. But all the Jews did know who Paul was because of his history, because of his upbringing, because of his training at the feet of Gamaliel, because he was present at the stoning of Stephen, and because of all the persecution that he relegated to the early church. The people know who he is. And he makes that statement. And he goes on to talk about the fact that he was trained as a Pharisee, the fact that he was raised and that he worships God, the father of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And he says he stands before trial before King Agrippa this day because the Jews accused him. But he says it's an incredible accusation they bring against me because they know everything that I have done. They know of my righteousness. They know of who I am. They know of what's going on. But let me tell you a little further. As I was persecuting the Jews, I sought letters from the chief priest, from the high priest, and they gave me letters, and I was on my way to Damascus, where I was going to bring people that were following this Jesus of Nazareth back to Jerusalem to stand trial and possibly be put to death. But while I was on that road, while I was on my way, I was blinded by a great light that came upon me, and all of those who were with me saw this light brighter than the sun. Verse 13. In verse 14, we fell to the ground, and a voice said to me in Hebrew, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And I said, O Lord, who are you? And he said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. And he goes on to talk about how this voice told him that he was going to be used by God to present the gospel message not only to Jews, but to Gentiles, so that Gentiles could turn from darkness to light, from being led away by Satan to being led by God. And so he says, O King Agrippa, therefore I cannot, verse 19, be disobedient to a heavenly vision, but declared first to those in Damascus, then in Jerusalem, and then throughout all the region of Judea, and also to the Gentiles. Now what's interesting here is Paul does not go on to talk about the fact that he was blinded, that he went into Damascus, and that he waited for one Ananias to come and pray over him for his healing, and that Ananias brought a further declaration from God as to what was going on, because most likely King Agrippa had heard all those things. But his point today was to say to King Agrippa, I saw a vision. I had a direct heavenly visit from God's spokesman on the road to Damascus. King Agrippa is one of the Pharisees. King Agrippa is part of the group that believes in spirits, believes in angels, believes in God sending spokespeople, prophets to the people, and sending heavenly beings to bring his message. Remember, the Sadducees don't believe in angels. They don't believe in the spiritual realm. They don't believe there is anything after death. They don't believe in resurrection. So they would not listen to this. But King Agrippa, this is right in line with what he would believe and what he had been raised and what he had been taught. And so Paul lays out before him the fact that this holy light came and gave him a commission, gave him a calling, gave him something he was to do. And he says, King Agrippa, I will not go against this heavenly vision. I will not be disobedient to it. And as he's talking, verse 24, it says that Festus, with a loud voice, cries, Paul, you're out of your mind. Your great learning is driving you out of your mind. But Paul said, I am not out of my mind, most excellent Festus, but I am speaking true and rational words. For the king knows about these things, and I speak to him boldly. You see, Festus didn't believe in heavenly beings. Festus did not believe that there would be something from heaven like a light that would shine around him, because as far as Festus was concerned, Caesar was God. Caesar was the ultimate authority and the power. There is no God in heaven. There is Caesar. And so Festus cries out, Paul, you're insane. There is no way that you saw a heavenly being. And Paul says, most excellent Festus, I beg to differ. I am making my defense before King Agrippa, who understands these things, who believes these things, and I am speaking boldly to him. And then he says, King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you do. And Agrippa said to Paul, in such a short time, would you persuade me to be a Christian? And Paul says, whether short or long, I would to God that only you, not only you, but also all who are here and hearing me this day might become as I am, except for the chains. And then the king rose, and the governor with him, and Bernice, and all the prominent people, and they left. You see, Paul laid it out perfectly for King Agrippa. He laid out perfectly what was going on and what should happen. And King Agrippa had no choice but to understand and agree that Paul had seen a vision. He had heard the stories. He knew the history. He understood, and Paul brought it right back around and said, King Agrippa, I have been visited by God our Father, who gave me a commission, who gave me a task to do. He told me that I should take the gospel message not just to the Jews, but also to the Gentiles. Now, it's interesting here that Paul is standing before mostly Romans at this point, the prominent men, all of the commanders that Festus would have brought in, all these people. In Caesarea, there were 5 major commanders. Each of these commanders oversaw 1,000 soldiers. Each of these commanders oversaw 10 centurions. So you can see Rome had a huge presence in Caesarea because there were a minimum of 5,000 soldiers. And these 5 prominent leaders of these soldiers were in this meeting. Paul is laying out his defense, not just before Festus, but before all the influential people of the Roman government. Paul is already exercising what God told him he would do, which is to bring the gospel to Gentiles. And he states it very plainly, I would hope, King Agrippa, that not only you, but everyone within my hearing would come to know Jesus Christ as I know him, and that they would come to follow him as I follow him, with the exception of the chains that are wrapped around my hands. I wish that they would all be like me. At that point, the whole group removed themselves from the council area, and they went to talk amongst themselves. And as they got away, the first thing that King Agrippa says, this man is doing nothing to deserve death or imprisonment. And Agrippa said to Festus, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. What really happens right here is that King Agrippa is telling Festus, I can't give you anything to write to the emperor about why this man should be sent to him. You're on your own. And I'm sure that they had some long talks. I'm sure that there was much that went on. And I'm sure that King Agrippa would say to Festus, look, everything he says, I fully understand. I'm trained as he is trained. I know what's going on, and these Jews have nothing to stand against him, except for the Sadducees who are jealous of Paul and all that he's doing, and who disagree with his beliefs because they aren't the same as their beliefs. But Paul is right. He's done nothing deserving of death. He has not blasphemed God. He has not defamed the temple. He has not done anything that could lead to his death by a Roman court. Frankly, he's done nothing that could lead to his death by a Jewish court, except for the fact that the Jews are jealous. But King Agrippa lays it out and says to Festus, there is nothing for you to be able to write to Rome about him. But since he's appealed to Rome he must go. We've come to the beginning of the end for Paul. We've gone through most of Acts now. We've seen the history of the early church. We know what's been happening. And now the defense of Christianity is going to be made to the highest levels of the largest government controlling most of the world, the Roman government. Paul is going to go before the emperor and set forth his case. Now, there's not a case to be set forth for his being let free. All he's going to do is he's going to go and proclaim the gospel to the emperor, to the Caesar, to his full court. God is working it out just as he said he would, that Paul will get to Rome and that Paul will present Christ before Caesar and the whole Roman government. I look forward to seeing you on Thursday night. We can talk more about this. And then next week we'll go into chapter 27, Paul's trip from Caesarea to Rome. God bless you. Thanks for listening. I'll see you Thursday night. Goodbye.